There we go.
So Nigel.
Yep.
How to conserve battery. Once you get it all up and running and you can see what you do, just turn your screen brightness down considerably. Not that. Yeah.
I'm full battery now, so it should be all right. It should be right.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you guys. We're online. We should be live and active on YouTube. And there we go. Yeah, there we go. Right, so with the book of 1 Samuel, and we're looking at chapter 2. So we're going to look at verse 22 and go down to the end. So it's a rather change of tone. Yesterday we were looking at Hannah's prayer, and so when we go into this, we're looking at Eli's family and what God says about them and how they were. So just wondering who'd like to pray. Either of you like to read? I'm happy to do either.
I'm happy to do anything.
Yeah. Oh, do you want to pray, Steve, and I'll read? How about that?
Yeah. Yeah, no problems.
Yeah.
Heavenly Father, I just thank you for Nigel and the Taylor family and their diligence to provide this Bible study, even when on the road. So literally, I ask you bless them and bless us all, Lord, with texts. But I ask particularly you would bless them. And bless everyone that hears it out in internet land and on YouTube, wherever this goes. May your spirit go with it, and just help us in this, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Steve. Right, I will read from verse 22 of 1 Samuel 2. Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing what his sons were doing to all Israel, how they lay with the woman that was serving in the entrance of the tent to the meeting. He said to them, "Why do you do such things? I hear your evil dealings with these people. No, my sons, it is not a good report I hear. The people of God of the Lord spread abroad. If someone sins against man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? For they did not listen to the voice of the Father, for it was the will of the Lord to put them to death." Now the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. And there came a man to Eli, a man of God to Eli, who said to him, "Thus says the Lord, did I indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, subject to the house of Pharaoh? Did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, and go up to my altar, and burn incense, and wear an ephod before me? I gave to the house of your father all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering from my people Israel? Therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promise that your house and the house of your father should go in and out before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, those who despise me will be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so there will not be an old man in your house. Then in distress you will look with an envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. For the only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep with his eyes out and grieve his heart, and all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. And this shall come upon your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be assigned to you. Both of them will die on the same day. And I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and my mind. and I will build him a sure house, and he shall go in and out before my anointed forever. And everyone who is left in your house shall come and implore to him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread, and shall say, please put me in one of your priests' places, that I may eat a morsel of bread. Okay, so this is a sudden turn of events, but let's remind ourselves that in the prayer of Hannah, which actually forms the shape of the whole book, there's statements here that actually it is the Lord who kills and brings life. He brings down to Sheol. He makes the poor rich, and brings down the low, and all of this. So in that prayer there is a whole load of prophetic material, and the scene here that we're opening on is Eli's sons who are doing evil. Basically, there's a whole load of rules for how the priests did things, and they had to do it very precisely and very right. They ignored all of that, used their position for their own benefit, and were just using people all around them. And so going to the temple was not the pleasant experience it should have been. Going to the temple was not the place that it should have been. There were people, they were taking advantage of the women at the temple gates. There was a whole load of things. And not only that, the holiest part of this was the sacrifices offered to God. And what these sons were doing was they were actually helping themselves to the choice mortals. Now, one of the things in the Old Testament, it says, is the fat belongs to the Lord. So actually, even in this, the fat portions were meant to be burnt on the altar. And people would say to them, oh, wait, I'll remove the fat. And they say, no, keep the fat on. We want a tasty meat. We want it roasted. So there was a whole load of things. They were just feeding their own fleshly desires while being in the very presence of the Lord. It's a very dangerous combination to have. So I think let's look at the first bit, which is the verse 12 to... all right. Oh, well, we didn't go to... Oh, I should have started at 12, sorry. But basically, let's do 12 to 21. I don't know. I'll read this out as well. Hold on. I've prepared for it, but I haven't. I skipped ahead. Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. The custom of the priests with the people was that when a man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come. When the meat was boiling, with a 3-pronged fork in his hand, he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and all the fork brought up the priest could take for himself. That's what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the men who were sacrificing, "Give me meat for the priest to roast. He will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, "Let them burn the fat first, and then take as much as you wish," he would say, "No, you must give it to me now, and if not, I'll take it by force." Thus the sin of these men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy clothed in a linen ephod. His mother used to make him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you children by this woman, for the petition she asked of the Lord." So then they would return to their home. Indeed, the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. Okay, and then the bit I've read, sorry, it's in the wrong order, but hopefully you guys are so clever you'll be able to stitch it together. So I'll just open this up for any things that stand out to you. I think there's a contrast building between Samuel and the sons of Eli that's building up quite starkly. So I'll open it up. Go for it, Steve. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
I think. Are you? Yeah.
Yeah, I should be able to hear me. Yeah, I would like to sum up 12 to 21 in one verse. But or the crux of this issue, it's right there in the middle. Sure, this doesn't preclude anyone else saying anything about these verses. But as time is of the essence, verse all, 17. Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt, if I could say that. Wow, we say, all sin's the same. Well, I don't know. This sin was very, very great. Yeah. And I also sum it up in 2 more verses from Romans. I've read one of them before. Talking about the Israelites. Romans 11, verse 21. For if God did not spare the natural, will he spare you? He's talking to Gentiles.
Yeah.
Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity towards those who are fallen, but the kindness of God to you, provided you continue in the kindness. Otherwise you too will be cut off. It's so self-explanatory to me. If anybody doesn't understand, put your hand up. I will explain this. But when something's so, there it is. I can't even. I don't need to say anymore. Anyone's bamboozled.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. I think what we come to here is the holiness of God, and when the holiness of God is so pure, it's almost like when you get sin in the presence of holiness, it's very glaring. And in this situation, I think you can get used to the things of God. Do you know what I mean? You can get a kind of like, oh yeah, this is just the process we go through. This is just what we do, or this is where we go. We can get used to the things, and then you get away with something once, and you think, oh well, that's okay. And then and gradually these small habits become huge things that take up huge amounts of space, and so in that I sort of feel these guys have been on a drift. They say they don't know the Lord, because if they knew the Lord, they wouldn't do these things. There's a sense where their approach to God is one of, oh yeah, we go through emotions, this is where I get our food from. Oh yeah, there's a nice woman at the gates of the temple that we can just use as we wish. That there was a power they had, and I think this is something that people in power are very often unaware of, is their own influence and weight. And actually any privilege that we've been given in the kingdom is to be given for the good of others. And the priestly role was a servant role. But here you find it in a dominant role. Actually, if your sacrifice, if you're not going to put that in the place I want it, we'll take it by force. God doesn't take sacrifices by force. It's out of open hands, not clenched fists. And so you've got this kind of total opposite to what God intended being demonstrated by these guys. And they were leery with it. They'd gone off over the top with it. And it's saying that Eli had got quite elderly, and actually, even though he spoke to them about it, nothing was being done. And I think Eli needed to do more than speak about it. He needed to remove them from their position, but he didn't do that, because who would then take it on? And there's a whole load of things tied in there. And so Eli's passivity has opened the door for this. I think that there's a number of things going on here. And I would say God is merciful and God gives plenty of opportunity, but there comes a moment where it passes the tipping point, and I'd say these guys are well past that tipping point, and that's why it says it was the Lord's desire for them to die, actually, because they'd passed that level. They got into an area, and it's like Israel. We looked at this in Habakkuk. They were, not listening to God. They're following idolatry. God warned them and warned them and warned them and warned them, and then eventually, you're going into captivity. That's now going to happen. The justice of God is there, and God's saying, but actually there's an opportunity to turn all the way, but they never take it. And in this case, Eli's sons were not taking any of that. They've destined their path. They've gone for it, and they've got to a point where God's wrath is on them, and on Eli as a family. It's a very sad state of affair. But then at the same time, you've got the rise of Samuel, and you've got this statement, he grew in honor before the Lord and before men. There's some beautiful things about him growing up, and the beautiful blessing on his mom and family as well. She had 3 more sons and 2 more daughters, so she had 6 children altogether. That's a weighty amount of children for someone who couldn't start early on. Do you know what I mean? So there's blessing in the midst of judgment, in the midst of all of this. And I just, I see Jenny's appeared on camera. It might be because Jenny's got something to say. Do you want to say something, Jenny?
Well, just that really they were stealing from God, weren't they? What was rightfully his, the sacrifice. They were just stealing what was meant for him, and that was really, obviously, the sin, because it was, it was presented to him holy, sort of thing. So, I was trying to think. I'm trying to think now how do we steal from God sometimes? Do we? When you think of how, God really had to act on that. We are so blessed that we can come under the blood of Christ, but it doesn't mean so we can just stuff, does it? It's quite challenging, I think, because we can just think, oh, well, that's okay, we're under the blood, but that's not the right way of thinking, is it? It's just really, wanting to do what God wants and pleasing him, and not doing anything that would, be against him. And, even like, because I was thinking about, where is it now? I've forgotten which book it is, the book before, I forgot which book it is. Anyway, where it says about you're stealing from God when you don't give your tithes. Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, it's similar, I suppose. If you decided you're going to give to God, and then you think, oh no, I need a coat, I'll buy a coat instead or something. I suppose in a way, it's a similar thing. But obviously, I don't think the fear of God is always in people these days, really. Because of the blood, because of Jesus, and he's so loving to us, we can take advantage of that and not realise that God is a holy God, and he hates sin, doesn't he? So I think it's quite challenging, this, really. But it's horrible, really, because you think, he did try and tell them, obviously, but he didn't do enough. Eli, he should have, as you say, expelled his sons from the job, because they weren't, they didn't sort of honour God, did they?
Yeah.
So.
And they sound very forceful guys. So at the same time, an old man trying to challenge that is very difficult. And I guess is why they were the way they were, because they thought, well, you can't stand up to us. We can just do whatever we like. And I think this thing, which you were saying, Jenny, is that honour for God that isn't very often in society now. I think that's down to people between them and God kind of working it through. I can understand that. This is another level. This is those in authority misusing what people are genuinely giving to God.
Yes, that's true.
And I think, this is something I know from the church I worked in Bracknell. The attitude they had to what people gave was they always said, people are giving this to God. in their tithes and offerings into the church. And actually we need to be careful how we manage that. There was a care and an attention to that. We do the same thing in our church here now. We don't want to be wasteful with money. We don't. Do you know what I mean? You can get in some of, so there's a kind of honouring that giving, but I think in this case there was no honour whatsoever. It was just snatch kind of attitude, and I think the challenge in this, for me looking at it, is how do we handle our privilege? And all of us have some privilege. Some of us were born with a silver spoon in our mouths, and some weren't. There's some, but all of us are in the West are incredibly privileged. How do we use our privilege? How do we use the things God's given us, the positions God's given us, sometimes even the titles God's given us, and some of those things? Are we people who can be trusted with the precious things of God? And so I look at this and the challenge is there. Yeah, I think it's the misuse of privilege, and you see that in every form of privilege. You see that in police forces from time to time in our news, where someone has used their authority wrongly. The murder of that woman in London, where the guy handcuffed her and arrested her and then murdered her. That's horrendous. That's a misuse of that, of something that has been trusted to that person, and that's a misuse of that trust. You find it in all levels of society. It's the same rebellion that's in these two, and is in the whole of humankind. Wherever there's privilege, there's very often can be. You've got good examples, but that temptation to use your privilege for bad is always there. And whether you're the Prime Minister or whether you're the keeper of supplies in a company, that temptation is there. And the Bible says no temptation has come upon us except that which is common to man. And so there's a common thing there, and so I think in some ways I'd see that. How do we use our privilege? How do we use what God's given us? When God trusts us with things, how do we deal with that? Do we handle it with honor and respect and care and the holy things? So I think there's a lot going on in this passage. Steve's hand's been up for a while. If it was physically up, he'd be aching. He'd be propping it up with the other hand. Go for it, Steve.
Yeah, this is all good stuff. It's hard it is to read this chapter in its fullness. It is actually beautiful because it just flips over from verse 17 to actually those that deal with contempt and those that are respectful and they're given respect. So it flips over to 17. Then Samuel, and he's got to be a type of Jesus. He's the one that ministers and hears the voice and everything. So, but yeah, just going on this. We don't like to deal on what was that phrase? The severity of God. But God is severe for those. Now, I've just looked that up quickly. Contempt, because that's not a word we use all day long. It's scorn, disdain, disrespect, deprecation, denigration. These are going to get scornfulness, derision, mockery. They were mocking God with what they were doing. Ridicules, disgust, loathing, hatred. These are serious words. If you take, what is contempt? We need to get ourselves far from even a sniff of this. I think that,
yeah. And I think in the ESV here, just on that bit you're saying, Steve, when the man of God visits Eli and says to him, hey, this doesn't mesh with the history of Israel. This isn't right. And he basically says, those who, in verse 30 it says, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. I don't know what other versions of the Bible say. I think the NIV is disdained, but here it says lightly esteemed. So in other words, their words have less weight, their influence has less influence, there's less going on there. And if you think, this is the Old Testament, this is before the cross, our righteousness is as filthy rags before God, but our righteous placement is in Jesus, and he is our righteousness, which actually puts us in a place of high esteem. When we give our lives to him, when we put our trust in him, when he pays the price for our sin, we are in a place of high esteem, easy for God to hear us. But here he's saying, those who dishonor me, actually there's that lack of esteem. And I don't know what other versions say. I don't know what yours says, Jenny. Are you ESV or you've got another one?
Which verse is it?
Verse 30, I think it is.
So therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promise that your house and your father's house will minister before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, those who honor me I will honor, but those who despise me will be disdained.
Yeah. So the is that NIV?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's disdained, but I'm really interested because I was expecting the ESV to say something like disdained because I'm used to reading it in the NIV years ago. But it's actually lightly esteemed is a really interesting phrase. It stuck with me. It's jumped out at me as I read it. I don't know if any other bits jumped out for you guys. Steve?
I've actually got here at the moment myself, so I'll just propose the difference there. It is true. Those who honour me, I will honour. Those who dishonour me, I will dishonour. Yeah, we know that. But why does it say lightly esteemed? See, there are degrees of this.
Yeah.
See, my hope is for Eli. He does some things here that, right, he might have had some motives wrong with, but he's saying the right thing. But his sons certainly cut off without hope. It seems there's not much. I can't see any hope, but certainly what we just read for the sons. And it's not for me to judge, but I'm a petty man. I'd like to see everybody in the kingdom. Nobody in the but it's not looking good for his sons. But anyway. It's probably not, may or may not help anyone, but we should know, some of these ancients and Old Testament saints. I mean, I'm going to see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The other quick thing I was saying, I noticed going back slightly. It was like the blessing. It reminded me of the blessing of it was Isaac, which went to Jacob, not Esau, and it switched there. And I think the blessing with Eli is switched to Samuel, who's outside of this line. So it is different, not a different son, but that's what happened there. It reminded me just of the blessing of Isaac when his son had. Is this the right son? But it didn't. It shows you here that the blessing went to Samuel, not his own sons. And God said, there'll be no sons in your house.
Yeah.
But he's actually, it says here, the Lord rejects Eli's household. It doesn't say he rejects Eli.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is all debatable matters. But God bless.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I've found is in times where God is moving incredibly powerfully, things that didn't seem to matter in the last season matter a lot.
Yeah.
So suddenly the intensity of knowing God's presence with you is far sharper. The evidence of God in meetings is so much more powerful. But also at the same time, I would say some of the judgments of God are more evident. And the grace of God's very evident as well. So I'm not saying, but it's almost like there have been seasons in churches and seasons in countries I've been in where where God's moved in a season, and there's an intensity that arrives, and something that was that people kind of were a bit umming and ahhing about before suddenly become almost in the sharp light of what he's doing. It becomes a sharper thing. It becomes more distinct and sharp. When you read books on revival, like the 1859 revival in Ireland, or the Outer Hebridean revival, and some of these revivals that God's moved through, at times where his presence have come. Duncan Campbell said, revival is nothing more and nothing less than the presence of God come down in the midst of his people. You know, there's that sense of the glory of God visiting an area. It's not just a meeting, as we were discussing about revivals the other day. It's that intensity is how I'd see it. And in this season, from Hannah's prayer onwards, there is an increasing intensity of the presence of God. There is an increasing intensity of God moving. And as a result of that, I think some of the things that maybe the guys got away with in the past suddenly is not going to happen anymore, because this sense of God's presence, his justice, who he is visiting in power. And I think that is a dynamic in the story where suddenly, this has been going on for a while. These guys have just seemed to be getting away with it. It seems like God's not even present, but God is present, and there is a judgment. But as he begins to move and the intensity rises, you look at the rise of Samuel and the downfall of Eli. These things shift and change with God bringing something into that season, and the barrenness of the previous season is over, and the life and the fertility and the breakthrough of this new season are just breaking out. And with that comes the judgment. You know, the Lord raises up, the Lord brings down, is Hannah's prayer, and you begin to see an immediate effect of that prayer beginning to happen in the house of Eli, in the nation of Israel. God's bringing something of his presence upon them. And I think this is a time of visitation with Samuel as well. Not just what's happening with Samuel, not just what's happening with Eli, but God is on the move. And the reason he's on the move is David's coming. David is the ancestor of Jesus. There is something of his purposes working out. And these guys are in that, and their heart attitudes and everything else are all part of that. But there's something beginning to happen, and I think this is immediate after Hannah's prayer, and I think it's there for a purpose. I don't know I feel I'm doing a lot of talking, but I'm really glad Steve's joined me by being in a car. I know he won't be able to participate much, but I'm glad Bible study can be on the move. It's not a static thing. But Sue, I don't know if you've got any comments. Jenny, I don't know if you've got any comments. Go for it.
I had something and it's gone now. I think, when God does move, I know when I really came into things of the Spirit and was born again, you get more conviction of sin because you see how good, the holiness of God, and you come into a real relationship with him. But I think that's, you're right, when God moves, people will think, well, I'm not doing that anymore. I realise that's wrong now, because the power of God really shows you the right and the wrong. And I can remember I was running a play group when I became born again, And I started looking at the books we were reading the children, and I thought, golly, that's not any good. That's teaching them this is teaching them that. And but my eyes weren't open before, and yet I believed in Jesus, but I hadn't really fully committed to him, I suppose. I hadn't really turned to, from my sin and turned to him. So, obviously that's what was happening, but it's really, really sad, isn't it? Because obviously God must have warned them before. Well, I would have thought he would have warned Eli before about this, because I was just thinking about myself with my own children. I think, well, you can't tell them what to do when they're married. Do you know what I mean? It's quite challenging, really. But you could, if they're doing something really wrong, I suppose you could just say, look, this is wrong. You shouldn't do this. And but in this age, people don't do that, do they?
Yeah.
Let them get on with it, sort of thing. But I mean, they still can go the wrong way. But I know this is the Old Testament, but it's still a principle. And I suppose we should really try and still guard our children, even when they're old, they're grown up and they've got their own lives. If they were doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I know sometimes I've said things to my children, but they just look at me. But, it's sort of challenging because he just let it go on. Didn't he? But I suppose he's afraid of losing them, that's the thing. People are afraid of losing their children if they say to speak out, aren't they, when they're grown up?
Yeah, and I think, these are violent guys. Now, I mean, I've heard of situations, less than ideal situations, where in some ways there's immorality in this historic situation in a church where someone was in power and using it for their own purposes, not in our country, in another country, and actually in that they had a house attached to that. They had a whole load of things that they had because of their position, and actually people were very aware of what was going on, but unable to act because it was tied in with other situations of them. So in actual fact, to act was quite a dangerous thing to do, and I know someone who took action in that and had to flee the country as a result. So actually there are situations very like this that are alive and well wherever there's privilege, and this is what I'm saying. There's some of these situations, and actually there's a need to challenge that. And I think for Eli, there were systems he could have challenged it early on, but by not challenging early on, he's left with a monster to try and deal with, and I think that's too big for him to take on. But as a result, he ends up with his whole family going down for it, and that's the sad thing. And so I think in a stitch in time saves nine, as they say. There's that action early that's really important. Sorry, Jenny, go for it.
Sorry, I interrupted you. It's like if you don't discipline your children when they're little, you don't, stop them doing things. And I think, they're too young, yet they don't know that at that age. But I think you have to start right from the baby, really.
Yeah.
They know that's wrong. You just tap in there. And people don't smack children today, but you just tap hand. Because, you wouldn't let a child put their hand in the fire, would you? Because it'd burn them. You couldn't do something. But the thing is, if you let it go on, it gets worse and worse, doesn't it? Because they're just unruly, So I remember hearing somebody I won't tell who it is, somebody recently that was saying about, I could not say it actually, that, they'll change when they're older. And I said, well, they won't unless you tell them, unless you show them.
Yeah. And I think there's something in this, in praying and asking God what we should do. And actually we don't know what was going on in Eli. We don't know where he was. We know he spoke some great blessings, and when he said, your prayer's been answered, it was. And when he says to them, actually God, he did. So there's a number of things where Eli's words are incredibly powerful. in some settings, but don't seem to be as powerful at home. And maybe it's a bit of this, what Jesus said, a prophet is without honor in their hometown. You know, there's some of that where his words didn't have the effect that they did in other places. We don't know. We can make excuses for them all, but at the end of the day, God's purposes were working out. There was a shift and a change coming. And actually there's a responsiveness to him. And I think so. I mean, if we might finish a little bit earlier today, but just our take homes. I think for me, it's that sense of God's blessing coming and our responsiveness to that. I think also that the Lord causes the rising and falling of many. There's a shift and a change. The season we've just been through with COVID has brought a shift in something spiritually as well. There's a shift in how things are working. We haven't woken up to that yet, but there's things that God's doing in that. And I think there's a lot to learn here about our privilege and how we conduct ourselves with that, and our awareness of our servant-heartedness within that is so important. So there's my take-homes in a nutshell. I don't know, Steve's got his hand waving. I hope you've pulled over at the side of the road. I hope you're not sitting in traffic, Steve. Go for it.
Yes, no, I'm parked. One thing that came to mind, and I've been talking about this in recent Bible studies, it's obedience. And it's the thing that you were saying, Nigel, it's obviously obedience to the Lord. Maybe the Lord was talking to Eli, but it's about obedience. The sons were disobedient, even to their father's own words. Even until death, they were disobedient. Maybe, who knows? We'll find that out.
Yeah.
But be obedient. Do it quickly. Do it with the right heart.
Yeah.
Do it with fullness. Obedience isn't partial. Obedience isn't delayed. And it is with the right heart, with praise. I'll probably go on and on about that too. You know, the penny drops fully in me. I mean, I've thought about that teaching for 10 years. I'm still thinking about it. It's still right. Sure, you got to apply it. Get the point.
Thanks,
And
Steve.
I thought as well that God is slow to anger and rich in love, and he gave them time to change, didn't he? Because he didn't. That could have been stopped a long time ago, but he gave them time, but they didn't respond, did they? So he's so patient, really.
Yeah.
But as you know, he has to respond to sin like in that particular time as well. So
thanks, Jenny. Sue, and we've been joined by Kitty. Sue, anything you'd like to chip in? Any take-homes you think? No. Okay. Well, I think we'll leave it there, and I'll move us offline. I'll just juggle my cup here. But thank you so much for that, and a privilege to join you from Exeter this morning. Our church has left the building, really, in a number of ways, and it's great to be able to do this on the road, and in the middle of travelling. So it is amazing to think the way of being able to produce this onto YouTube while sat at the side of the road. I just think is a fantastic thing to be able to do. So I will end off here. Let me just this brightness is coming and going. I think there's some weird setting.